This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today asks the provocative question: what if you could have whatever you want produced and provided immediately and effortlessly, no matter how customized, with minimal environmental impact? My guest today, Rob Wolcott, gets into this idea of proximity. What's going to happen to all of us, society, life, the state, when everything is essentially just in time? Now, there'll be some things we can always argue about that are never going to be just in time, but a lot is going to change. And this concept of just in time, we've not thought it through properly, but it's going to hit us. Are you ready? Is your family ready? Your friends ready? Your kids ready? Because if everything becomes closer to the moment of demand, society changes. It shifts. It doesn't go back. Now, is this necessarily a good thing? That's a whole conversation as well. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right into my guest today, Rob Wolcott, and discuss proximity. Given that you are a professor of entrepreneurship, it's a word that I'm very fond of because I don't think I've had an engaged job or a real job since really age 19, 22, somewhere in there, working in the Circuit City warehouse, maybe a bartender for 6 months. That's about it. I'm a Gen X guy who kind of came along right when Netscape went public, and it was pretty obvious I better do something online. Kind of sets the stage, I guess, where I want to bring up. Before we even dive into your main content, as a professor of entrepreneurship, a place like the University of Chicago, I would really love for you to set the stage and give me some perspective as an outsider looking in, calling you from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, a place where there's a hell of a lot of capitalism, to say the least, and a hell of a lot of entrepreneurs. I guess the way that I asked that is I'm always surprised as a Gen X guy, spurred on by Andreessen launching Netscape in 95. I'm always surprised that the word job is so bandied about these days. Even after all this time, all this opportunity that we've all had a chance to see, it does seem like most people are ultimately seduced by the job. I would hazard a guess, even some of the very bright kids in your classes with the best grades and all that kind of stuff, at the end of the day, if Goldman Sachs or Arthur Andersen or somebody comes calling at the end of 4 years or 6 years or whatever it is, that's hard to run away from. I'm really curious your perspective on entrepreneurship versus a job, because for me, I just think you got one life, at least at some point in our lives, taking a swing at not worrying about the job, but trying to create, make, invent something. It's just so damn fulfilling.
You've actually asked about 3 different questions and proposed a few different answers at the same time. I'm going to try and unpack it, Michael, but I love this. This is actually one of my favorite questions. It's usually posed to me by students or alums, or somebody on the subway in New York finds out I'm the professor of business and they say, well, what should my kids study? A few things backing up. I am a professor, but I'm an adjunct professor. And I'm an adjunct professor of innovation. Entrepreneurship's also in my title at the University of Chicago. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I invest actively in entrepreneurs, love entrepreneurs. But my research and teaching and advisory has been, how do large established enterprises and governments try to innovate better? They're related but different worlds. The second point, as I mentioned, I'm an adjunct professor. So Michael, you and I are actually in a similar boat. I haven't had a quote unquote real full-time job until I started my master's PhD program at Northwestern back in 1990, 6, I think. I've had what we call in the book Proximity a portfolio career, much like you. The old notion of the job is quite seductive for all the reasons that you can guess, and everybody would probably share: the consistency, the focus. There's a cost. Options come at a cost. As you and all your trader audience members know, options come at a cost, but options can also have great value. The way I think about optionality in terms of careers, and then this is where entrepreneurship comes in a big way, is having multiple possible options in the future, multiple paths, and not multiple paths that you're just thinking about on a Sunday afternoon when you have some downtime, if you have downtime, but option paths that you're actually nurturing and developing and putting some money on the table, maybe while you still have your full-time job. Or maybe you have one sort of half-time role and a number of other things that you're engaged in. In a world of rapid, volatile change, having a portfolio, looking at your career as a portfolio of activities and paths to the future, I think is a much better in terms of risk coverage. Michael, you and I both agree a company like Lehman Brothers will never go out of business. Come on, Lehman Brothers has been around for a century, right? How could that ever happen? Or WorldCom, make the list. That's how I think about it. I spend about a third of my time teaching at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern and also at the Booth School of Business at University of Chicago as an adjunct professor of innovation. I spend about 40% of my time investing in early stage companies, working with entrepreneurs, and the rest of my time working with large enterprises and a group we call the World Innovation Network, or TWIN, which is really just a group of people that gets together sometimes to talk about the future. So that's the portfolio.
Let me put you on the spot a little bit more. When we look at this, let's just call it a binary choice here. You got entrepreneurship on one side, you have the job on the other side. Given the background that you just laid out, a background that myself, and I'm sure many people listening relate to and say, oh yeah, I could have a beer with that guy. He's reasonable. He gets it. But how does it make you feel when so much of the conversation from other areas of a university, from major media, from politicians, literally gets reduced to a job? Does it strike you? It strikes me. When are we going to be a little more diverse in our thinking, a little more flexible in our thinking, and say something? When am I going to hear a leader on a major network, for example? I don't know if these things really exist anymore, but a leader say kind of like what you say. It's like everyone's got their hands tied behind their back and just beholden to the system. Of course, we're going to talk about some systems that are changing pretty radically, as you write about in your new book. But how does it make you feel when you see that people get so lodged in their rigid silos?
Different things for different people. To be honest, there are a lot of people who seek that stability and consistency. There is something to be said for a full-time W-2 role in terms of simplicity and focus. The way I think about it is not so much whether someone should be an entrepreneur or have a portfolio career or have a single focus to rise. Perhaps they want to rise to become CEO of a major corporation. It's harder to have a portfolio approach when that's your mission objective. But that's really the point, Michael. The way I like to think about it, and we actually have these conversations in my executive MBA course at Booth, is what's going to be most fulfilling for you? What is it you want to manifest in the world? What is your personal sense of purpose? When you dig into that, how can you best manifest that? To push back a little bit, you and I are 100% aligned in terms of our own preferences and what we see, but there are some people who have different characteristics, mission objectives, where focusing 100% on one job for a while is actually the best thing for them. What I tell people is don't let it happen by accident. I think what you're really saying is that life picks you up and carries you in a direction. Unless you have the discipline to stand back and be strategically unfocused for a little bit and ask yourself, what do I really want to manifest in the world? What kind of life do I seek to lead? What value do I seek to create? And when you can have a deeper conversation with yourself, maybe with people also you trust, and really dig into that, then you can start to discover how best to engage the world. Because I'll also say on the other side, Michael, as much as you and I love being entrepreneurial, there are a lot of people in the world where maybe that's not really a fit deal for them. To round this out, kind of where we started, when things are changing so fast, and things like AI are rising and people wring their hands and wonder, oh my gosh, is it coming for me? This is where portfolio optionality becomes really essential. I think the problem that you're pointing out has more to do with helping people understand what's meaningful to them and how to make it happen in a world that's changing fast.
I'll wind this particular piece of the conversation down. I don't disagree with what you just said. I've met plenty of people in my life where they would just be happier if they did not have the stress of the uncertainty, even if the job is never fully guaranteed. The idea that they'd actually be more comfortable if they took the job and got fired from the job and took another job. Something about that is more comfortable.
To your point, it's a fallacy that full-time job is more stable or guaranteed. It could go away at any moment.
When the flow takes you along, let's say post undergraduate or post-grad degree or whatever, the flow takes you along. If you make a decision, if someone makes a decision and they say, well, being an entrepreneur is not for me, let me just take the job. How the hell do you know? That's the only thing I would add to the tangent there in the end of what you just said, is that if you don't try, you never know, really. That's the interesting thing about it. That's a little bit of a tangent, a little bit of my perspective. Okay, I try to ram it down everybody's throat. Give it a shot. You never know what's going to happen, right? So I love the idea of where you've gone in your new work, though. The best way to bring the audience in to where you have gone is, frankly, just your opening salvo. And I'm quoting, what if you could have what you want, produced and provided immediately and affordably, no matter how customized, with minimal environmental impact, ? Products, services, experiences on demand, no magic involved. Even in the last handful of months, when friends start to demonstrate, and this is just one aspect of where you're going in your work, when friends start to demonstrate some of the AI creation and some of the AI use cases, which are still pretty rough at this stage of the game for me, even though my father made a case on the dental side, he's a dentist, and he made the case recently to me how great it was that they don't have to make molds anymore and everything is just scanned and da-da-da-da-da. What if you could have what you want produced and provided immediately and affordably, no matter how customized? Wow, right?
We're, in some cases, Michael, already there. And in other environments, it's going to take quite a while. But the point of proximity, the book you mentioned with Kai-Han Krippendorf, my co-author, the point is this is what's different about the past. And this is where every industry is going the rest of our careers. Just to underscore how much of a limb I'm going out on here, as an academic, we're trained never to use words like never or all, because then somebody has to do is find one example and to disprove what you've asserted. But I think we make a very strong case in the book that this is the direction that every industry will be going the rest of our careers. What do I mean? Let me step back from that. I can give you briefly the origin story. Back in 2014, 10 years ago, I was at a tech conference. I'm sure you've been to many tech conferences. Probably your listeners go to tech conferences. And there was a period for about a decade around that time where there were two slides that everybody would use, and they drove me nuts. They're boring as tears, and everybody had seen them 1,000 times. So why keep using the same slides? And the two slides were, one was Moore's Law, which, by the way, is amazing. Okay, I'm not saying it's not amazing, but after 174th time seeing someone present Moore's Law, do you really have to present that again? And then the next slide, it was almost like it was obligatory was, by the year 2030, there'll be 1 trillion connected devices. Really? Do you have to share that again? I was sitting there stewing inside myself, thinking there must be some deeper way to think about this. There must be some common characteristics of digital and digitally enabled technologies that if we could discern those, we could develop foresight as to where the world is going, where the future will go. What we quickly realized was that digital technologies of all sorts, whether that's AI or a mobile app or blockchain, that it could also be 3D printing or rooftop solar power generation, distributed energy resources, as they call it in the power industry. All of these are digitally enabled. And what they allow us to do is compress capabilities of more and more types in smaller and smaller packages and distribute them all over the economy, ever closer to each moment in time and space. And so therefore, what digital technologies do is they push the production and provision of value, products, services, experiences, ever closer to the moment of actual demand in time and space. Let me say that again. Digital technologies push the production and provision of value ever closer to the moment of actual demand in time and space. When I first started talking about this in 2015, 2016, it was clear to me that most people thought I was talking about like better supply chain management. And I would slap my forehead and Well, that's nice. I love supply chain management, but that's like looking at the old model and tweaking it a little bit with tech. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is creating technology platforms and business models that literally encourage us to procrastinate as long as possible before adding value until you have an actual customer with an actual need ready to buy, ready to use. That's proximity. So I'll give you one example where it's already there. The provision of video content. For that matter, Michael, the provision of your podcast. It's proximate all the time. Our tagline for proximity is anything, anytime, anywhere. If somebody wants to listen to your podcast, as long as they have a mobile device on the subway or on the obligatory beach with their laptop, not that anyone ever uses a laptop on the beach, you can literally watch any of this content anywhere, anytime. That's already proximate. Now, the production of that content is not proximate in time. It's pre-recorded often, like it is right here.
We could do it live.
We could absolutely do it live, and that would be proximate in both cases, production and provision. Now enter AI. I need a cat video where such and such is happening. And rather than actually having to film a cat, Sora can create a cat video for you. Imagine where that's going to be in 10 years, 20 years. That's the direction it's going. Creation of entertainment, I would say with VR, whole lived experiences eventually from whole cloth, produced and provided specifically customized for that user in that context. And this is true in physical products too. The easiest way to think about it is 3D printing, though I'm not limited to that at all. And controlled environment agriculture. In December 2022, I visited Bustanica in Dubai. I was doing research for the book. I was speaking for a conference in Sharjah in the UAE. And I popped over to Bustanica. It's a joint venture between Bustanica and Emirates Airlines. It's the largest vertical farm in the world in operation right now. Now, first of all, the leafy greens and the herbs they were growing there were as good as anything you'd get at a French farmer's market. No offense to the French, by the way. The punchline for me was the next morning, I got on my Emirates Airlines flight back to New York, and the lettuce in my salad was picked at this facility 3 miles from the airport the night before. Think about not only how much better the experience is, but think about the sustainability of that and the supply chain of that. Today, they grow leafy greens in Spain and North Africa. They harvest it a week in advance. They put it on a ship. They take it to a warehouse and then hope it's still viable by the time it ends up in my salad. With this new Proximate model, they grow exactly what they need, where and when they need it. The experience is far better. So we break the trade-off between customization and cost. We become more and more customized, and ultimately we can ameliorate the sustainability challenges we face in the world.
I don't know if it's a negative or a monkey wrench, but let me throw some thought at this and use an example that I'm thinking of here where I happen to be right now. We have a situation globally where a very small percentage of people have extreme amounts of capital, and those people control a hell of a lot of our businesses. I'm Mr. Capitalist. If they got there, hell, I can't be jealous, whatever. They did it. That's the way it works, right? But if you reach a situation where people have got such amounts of money that it just gets passed down over the generations, it does seem like with some of the innovation that you're talking about, you could kind of corner the market, so to speak, in many different areas to where it might be harder and harder. For example, Amazon's pretty close to Proximate these days. If I want something, they get it there really quick. But on the flip side, I suspect that unless something drastically goes wrong, that Jeff Bezos' heirs for a significant period into the future will be running Amazon. How do you see some of the negatives here? Let me give one more example that I see on the ground in Ho Chi Minh City. So in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, fast food restaurants have not taken hold yet. You've got a situation where many local merchants will do pho or banh mi or something like that at a cheaper cost than the handful of McDonald's in Vietnam can serve customers. I don't know when that's going to change. I don't know when that shift will happen. Maybe a place like Vietnam is a weird petri dish in the sense that it kind of waited. It's got this mercantile class and merchant class of people that are hustling and selling and whatnot. Give me some perspective on this. I can imagine, which I think it's Great. Your example with the lettuce, who the hell's going to argue with that, right? But I start to look ahead into the future and I say, well, who's going to control everything? And then on the flip side, too, I guess this goes into my Ho Chi Minh example with the Ho Chi Minh City example with the food sellers. It does seem like if we get more and more proximate innovation, back to my original conversation with you at the start of our conversation, that the jobs might be a hell of a lot less secure. Am I on to something, or are you just going to shoot me out of the water? You're welcome to shoot me out of the water.
Joseph Schumpeter, the great Austrian-American economist, he was the first one to use the word entrepreneur the way we use it today. One of the things he argued was the only creator of value in the long run in the economy is innovation. And the reason is everything else is just caretaking and moving the deck chairs around, basically. The reason is quite simple. If you do something, Michael, and make a lot of money at it, what do other people do?
If Jeff Bezos does it, and who's waking up today trying to make the next Amazon?
Well, that's another level. They've created a moat. They've created the scale to be able to execute at that level. They are a singular company, but they're not alone. There are lots of other players, a number of other players in the world, and they came from somewhere ultimately in history, right? They weren't invented right after the crash of the Roman Empire. So things change. But the point that Schumpeter was making was if you do something and make a lot of money, lots of other people are going to copy it. And then over time, price is competed down to marginal cost, and eventually all profit is eliminated from the system. So we have to innovate to create value in the long run. In terms of one thing you were talking about is the concentration of power. There is a concentration of power when there are requirements to be a significant platform player. We have lots of people talk about this. We could go into it a little bit if you want, but it's a fairly well-trodden topic. There are certain things you need to be able to do at scale if you want to have a well-functioning, create, build, and maintain a large language model, for instance. It's going to take a ton of resources, and there are only so many organizations that can do it. On the other hand, those platforms create an environment within which anybody can do anything anywhere, increasingly. More and more people can try stuff, can get in and pilot things. You get this rise of experimentation and prototyping. You get an increase in the ability of people to attempt to become entrepreneurs, which is what you said you wanted in the first place. Michael, I'm a fan of dystopic literature, of dystopias. I'm not a fan of dystopias per se, but I'm a fan of us exploring them and talking about them because it gives us a sense for what we want and what we don't want. There are a whole lot of dystopic dynamics that occur as a result of this thing. Here's just one. If human beings can have whatever we want, wherever and whenever we want them, will that increase the incidence of narcissism, for instance? Will that juice the narcissism that lurks somewhere inside of each of us? I think the answer is looking like yes. Our expectations rise dramatically. Our impatience becomes amplified. Remember a decade ago, if somebody could deliver something to you in 2 or 3 days, you thought that was pretty good. Today, if it doesn't show up the next day or even before that, you think, what the heck's going on there? Did they have a denial of service attack or something? These people don't know what they're doing. Those expectations are dramatically rising. And meanwhile, the marketplace, God bless it, that's what the market does. It tries to do more with less. It tries to serve customers better than anybody else. That's how people make money. The marketplace is out there trying to understand what each one of us wants in some detail, even if we're not saying it. It's catering to us. Now, there's this metaphor that, on the one hand, found really annoying because it's overused, the customer is king. But on the other hand, it's actually far more apt than most people think. Why is that? Well, what we think of when we think of a king is someone who's in charge. A king or a queen, they say something off with his head, their head comes off, right? They're in charge, they have power. But at the same time, Michael, there are always people at the court who are trying to manipulate the monarch, who are trying to figure out how to push and pull their strings to get them to do what they want the monarch to do. In a very real way, each one of us as consumers, each one of us as citizens, is becoming like that monarch of old, where all the systems, all the technologies, all the businesses and political entities are trying to pull our strings to cause us to do the things they want us to do, and at the same time also serve us to give us what we want. Whether it's what we think we should want or not is another issue.
I would hazard a guess for me as an outsider looking in, and as someone who grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, 15 miles outside D.C., the six of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America now surround D.C. So I would think that one of the biggest issues in front of proximity will be the political machination. What will politicians do when they understand the proximate innovation, the directions that you're going? Because they're not going to stay out of the game. They're going to get into the game. Usually when the politicians get into the game, they usually mess things up.
What do you really think, Michael?
No, that was actually the taint version. The real version is much more hardcore than that.
To your point, there, as automation rises, as in some cases power is consolidated and amplified within these large platform organizations, whether it's Amazon or Google or Apple, or in a different way, NVIDIA right now, for instance, it will antagonize these dynamics, and politics by definition will become involved. Michael, anytime we have more than two people together, we have politics. But to underscore this, an economist, Brian Arthur, whom I like quite a bit, his work on technology and the realm of economics, just before the COVID crisis, he said this will not just be an economic challenge, but a political challenge. How will the spoils of technology be distributed? We're seeing that manifest today. At the same time that entrepreneurs or innovators at corporations are trying to figure out how to leverage new technologies to get us to do what we want, what they want us to do, but also to serve us, politicians and the parties that advocate for them are doing the same thing. We just have to assume that the well-intentioned actors, the nefarious actors, they're out there doing the same experiments, trying to push the same envelopes. Sometimes those envelopes rip. Yes, this is less of an economic discussion than it is a political one, but the two are intimately related. To the extent that the United States can continue to have a leading role in the development of these technologies and businesses, right now it's looking pretty good. History bears out that power follows economics. And until you get to the point where the Vikings show up and steal everything. It's a constant back and forth, and politics and economics are unfortunately inextricable.
So you lay out some how questions. For example, how we work, how we eat. You've brought that up as one quick example in the airline. I'm looking at how we prevent and cure, which for me, Gen X guy, I keep myself in shape. I'm working out 7 days a week. Really not drinking alcohol anymore. It's been a long time since I really have. I tell people maybe it's like 10 beers a year, something like that. Look, we only get one life. If we think we've got a chance at getting to 90 or 100, hey, why not? If you can still run a 100-meter dash at age 100 in 20 seconds, hey, why not? And there's guys on YouTube doing that, which is amazing. I love the idea of having the ability, as you describe it, wearables, implants, etc., to monitor our health and to give us an advantage real time, proximate right now, right? We analyze a situation like America. We look at something coming out of COVID. In hindsight, we all realize that if you were in bad physical condition, that COVID was definitely dangerous as hell. If you weren't, it was not, frankly. Speak to me on this complicated issue of how we prevent and cure when you're going to have portions of the population that are actively working to keep themselves in a condition that hopefully keeps their minds sharp, their bodies sharp, lessens the need for doctor's offices and all that kind of stuff. But then we've also got a portion of the population that clearly doesn't care anymore. And they just say, I'm going to eat whatever I want to eat. The World Health Organization metrics for America say America's going down the wrong path on that. How do you look at something like that? It becomes quite complicated.
First of all, it's a great question, but I'll start by pointing out that what you just articulated has been true as long as we can document. There are people that have been concerned about their health. There are people that lay around in the Roman Empire eating lots of fatty foods. How We Prevent and Cure chapter is my second favorite chapter in the book, and for 3 reasons. My wife, Ada, and my daughters, Jolie and Sage. I want to be around for them. I want to be around as long as I can in Jolie and Sage's lives. They're 13 and 14 and a half right now. And boy, oh boy, I tell them I run 5 days a week. And I'm doing that not really because I love running. I'm doing it because I want to be around when I'm 100. I want to see their lives unfold in the world. So how we prevent and cure is one of my favorite chapters also, because it's so dramatic what is coming in the next 20 years. In our lifetimes, even as Gen Xers, Michael, in our lifetimes, what's coming in the next 20 years. And what we do in these chapters, you mentioned how we eat, how we power, how we create and produce, how we prevent and cure, how we defend, etc., is we look at how proximity impacts each of these different realms of life. Really, you can think industries, but it's kind of realms of life, like how we work, for instance. And in prevent and cure, the fundamental impact of proximity is proximity pushes healthcare from curing things to preventing things. It's actually very easy to see. What do I mean by this? Well, today we have Oura rings and Apple watches, and that's nice. It has an impact monitoring some of your body systems. But imagine in 10 years or 20 years, Michael, when we can always on real-time monitoring of every aspect of your lived system. You don't even have to put it on your wrist or your finger. It's disappearing into your daily life. It's monitoring every aspect of your body, and it's looking for weak signals, processing it through an AI system that becomes more and more effective. And there are already examples of this in the world. I could share some of them with you if you like. The AI system is looking for interpreting these weak signals, and then they ping you and they say, hey, Rob, we're seeing a problem. Go talk to the doctor. It's probably not a big deal. You go to the doctor, or the doctor comes to you virtually. That's set that aside. And the doctor says, Rob, you know what? It looks like you have stage 0 pancreatic cancer, but that's great. That's fine. We can fix that. It's really early stage, no problem, a little bit of treatment, and you're in great shape. Now, on the other hand, compare that, Michael, to today. With pancreatic cancer in particular, we don't screen for that on a regular basis. When you go in for your annual physical, which by itself is crazy to imagine, I'm just going to go get checked up once a year. We don't screen for pancreatic cancer as a routine basis. And what happens is you have these symptoms and you feel worse and worse. You think it's indigestion. You think, who knows? And you go to the doctor and they say, oh my gosh, Rob, you know what? You've got stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and there's really not much we can do about it. Proximity, being everywhere all the time, monitoring, running in the background, will push over our lifetimes healthcare. Finally, everybody's been talking about prevention for decades. Finally, we've got a dynamic that I'm convinced will drive how more and more of healthcare from curing things to preventing them before they're even a problem. I'll just put a fine point on this, Michael, by sharing a personal story. My father, Bob Wolcott, died at the age of 63 of an aortal aneurysm. 2 months before that event, he had a full physical, completely clean bill of health. The doctor said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You're in great shape. And 2 months later, he was dead. If we had that walking around with my dad back in 2004, I have a feeling he might still be with us.
Let me take this to another point with the healthcare. I can remember the only time that anyone has ever asked me about my healthcare choices was when I first signed up for an insurance program in my 20s. Essentially, at that time, it was like, okay, if I get some kind of an injury or whatnot, I don't want to burden the parents or to burden anybody with some kind of major medical cost for myself, right? I think they asked me, give your honest answer. Are you a smoker or are you not a smoker? That was it. Here we are all these years later, and I'm thinking to myself, this gets into my DC politics. If we have all this wearable stuff, the current situation leads me to believe that it would be probably helpful for us individually, as you mentioned with your father, but I can't imagine that the system will be fair. Of course, fairness is not really a thing, but in the sense that somebody might very well keep themselves in shape, and we're going to have all these wearables that can monitor everything. You essentially know what's going on, then you're going to have other people that don't. Now, the real question becomes, as we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about business, will insurance companies at some stage of the game step in with all this technology and give either a benefit or a penalty to the people that play it right and the people that play it wrong?
People in insurance and payers generally have tried a bunch of different methodologies to encourage people to live better and all the difficult things. But one of the things that's exciting about technology and proximity is they're just things that human beings aren't good at in general. There are exceptions, people who are really committed to their health, for instance, they make good dietary choices, etc. by and large, that's tough. People don't do it. They might think they want to do it. They might think it's a great idea. They might do it for a couple of weeks and then give up.
Do you think with the idea of the wearables and all this tech, this proximate tech that you're talking about, you think it's possible in the future that the person that stays up to speed and puts the time and energy in to keep themselves at a certain levels of health, and this stuff's all measurable, do you think there will actually ever be a benefit for that person? Because there currently is not.
Keep in mind that the ultimate benefit, the objective they're going for is to live better and live longer.
Of course, but if I'm paying the same as somebody who doesn't care at all, and their lifestyle and their health condition shows they don't care, that's the part that I'm getting at. I'm just curious your perspective on there. Maybe you don't want to walk into that minefield.
Just to put a point on it, people who do have a healthier lifestyle do pay less for health insurance. But I'm actually going to take this in a different direction. What's one of the things that's exciting about technology is we can find solutions to things that humans aren't very good at where they don't have to compromise. This might not be very satisfying for the Marcus Aureliuses of the world that are listening here, Stoics, and they want people to make the right decisions and run 7 days a week like Michael does. And by the way, more power to you.
I'm working out 7, no running 7.
I run 5, you run 7. I'm offering you my great respect, Michael. But what I mean is humans in general don't make great decisions, especially when it's a longer term issue. In a context of prosperity, which not all of us in the world, but more and more of us in the world exist in a context of plenty. And in addition to the access to food, we've had the access to food, which has led to this epidemic rising around the world of obesity. And obesity is a manifestation of the fact that for millennia, we existed in a context of scarcity. You had to eat when there was food on the table. So our natural dynamics are to be attracted to fats and sugars, et cetera. Now, when you're existing in a context of plenty, which very, very few of us have existed in history, then we end up with things like obesity because of the natural human proclivities. Let's throw a spanner into the works here. These are the GLP drugs, Lilly, Novo Nordisk, et cetera. These are technology solutions to human failings. So far, they're working extraordinarily well. I would propose that these are harbingers of a much broader trend. So technologies that enable us to eat, for instance, eat meat with a lower environmental footprint, with eliminating the ethical concerns of the raising of animals to eat meat. It's coming. It's called cultured meat.
Are we allowed to opt out of the Petri dish meat? Can I stay with the Wagyu cows up there in Japan and let them keep doing the old school stuff?
I hope so. If you and I have our way, yes. I'm not going to call myself a libertarian entirely because sometimes that goes too far. But I think people should be allowed to make their own decisions modified for hurting other people, of course. But they should be able to make their own decisions and they should be able to decide whether they want to eat traditional meat or try the cultured meat. And today it's still very, very expensive. It's very limited, but it's working. I visited Aleph Farms in Tel Aviv in January of last year. I tried some of the meat. It was an incredibly expensive burger because it's still in prototype development, but it was pretty good.
That was a very weird way of saying pretty good, by the way.
Well, it was surprisingly good was my reaction to it. What the holy grail for them is they're trying to create actual steaks, and it's a matter of texture and how you construct it so that it has the tension of meat and all this. But what's exciting about this, Aleph Farms and a number of other companies with lots of capital behind them are moving quickly to improve this capability. So what's the punchline here? This is proximity, by the way, in a big way. Right now, if you want to make beef, you have to have lots of acreage. You have to have lots of physical animals that you take care of for a very long period of time, and then you slaughter them. And it's a huge supply chain. Set aside all the ethical issues. It's expensive, not terribly sustainable, has lots of negative impacts. And it takes a huge footprint. So you're not going to put that right in the middle of New York City, right? But with cultured meat, the facility they had in Tel Aviv was in an office building, and it was about twice the size of the room that I'm sitting in right now. And from that room, they could create beef. You can imagine not next year, but 5 years, 10 years, you can imagine cultured meat production facilities, small footprint, distributed all over urban areas, in the outskirts, maybe in the suburban areas, They don't have to be all the way in Omaha, Nebraska. They can actually be in upstate New York and serve Manhattan. By the way, that'll be customized. Aleph Farms, for instance, in Tel Aviv, is working with some celebrity chefs where they say, here's the exact kind of beef that I want. And I want to have intellectual property rights around owning that specific kind of beef. Coming back to your original point, Michael, I hope for all of us that we have the right and the opportunity to have any of those experiences, whether it's traditional meat grown the traditional way, or cultured meats, or beyond meat, impossible, pea protein, soy protein, et cetera. I'm hoping we have all those options. But the point is that over time, we're going to see proximate solutions like cultured meat. They're far more sustainable, far less water use. The water use for this stuff is like 99% lower than traditional production of meat, for instance. The environmental footprint is vanishingly smaller than traditional meat production.
I'm not a comedian, but I feel like there's a Soylent Green joke in here somewhere. I got one last question for you. Tech itself, think about something like an Apple computer, anybody that's making the hardware, the EV cars and whatnot. Tech itself, the complicated tech, I can't imagine how that's going to get proximate anytime soon. Meaning it's always going to take a certain amount of time to design these chips, the architecture, the physical design of the units. Of course, things will keep getting smaller. People can imagine the phone disappearing to a small little AI device you keep in your pocket. But the tech itself, it does seem like that might be something that won't become proximate right away.
Michael, do you mean the development and R&D and innovation that goes into creating new tech? You mean that, or do you mean the tech itself?
Both, because ultimately the R&D is going to take time. I'm real close to Taiwan and they're building chips there. It all takes time. I'm looking at so many devices on my desktop right now and thinking, okay, we can't make the lettuce example work with the tech as fast, I don't believe.
That's true. These will all be in different trajectories, but the direction is still in the direction of proximity. The development and R&D for really cutting edge stuff, it's going to continue to take lots of time. It's going to be sped up in some ways, but it's going to continue to be a long horizon sort of work, especially cutting edge stuff. So let's just agree on that. What we're not saying in proximity is that everything just becomes easy in the next couple of years. We're not saying that. But we're saying the overall trend of every industry is to produce and provide ever closer to the moment of demand. The notion of developing new semiconductors, which is a long, complicated process. AI is radically changing what's possible in terms of the development of custom chips. So if you look at some of the things that companies like Broadcom are doing to enhance and accelerate their ability to design custom chips for clients, even that's speeding up. I do think actually we're going to see these things happen. I'll come to my favorite chapter in the book because it's the craziest. And of course, therefore, it's the last chapter where we talk about two horizons of the 21st century. Those are space and virtual reality. And the reason we call them the horizons of the 21st century is that we've never really been there. Now, of course, there were a few people on the moon probably last century and everybody was playing Pong, but that's pretty thin. Later this century, virtual reality will become more and more comprehensively experienced. Eventually, we won't even have the goggles on anymore. Direct brain-machine interfaces, for instance. As the experience of virtual becomes more and more comprehensive, we will, by definition, be able to create and have any experience anywhere, anytime. It will be a visceral experience. So proximity, by definition, is virtual reality is proximate by definition, because any experience that's available through VR, as it becomes better and better and better, we can have anywhere, anytime. Now, space, even more exciting to me, space is actually 100% proximate. Why is this? Well, when I was doing research for the book, I called a friend of mine at Baylor who's an expert in space health. She's a researcher in space health. Yes, those people do exist. She runs a grant program for NASA called TRISH, which is to invest in space health research. And I was telling her about proximity, and Dorit Denoviel is her name. And Dorit said to me, oh my gosh, Rob, everything we're funding at TRISH is to drive proximity. Everything we're doing to help have humans survive and thrive in space is to drive proximity. I never thought about it like that. I said, Dorit, what do you mean? She said, well, if you're on a spaceship for 7 months to Mars, you've only got what's on the spaceship. So all the research and development going on all around the world to try and figure out how to make that happen, is to provide products, services, experiences proximate to the actual demand of the people in the spacecraft. Because if you forgot something, you can't call Amazon, at least not yet. I'm sure in the future you'll be able to contact Amazon from your spaceship. But for now, if you've got a medical emergency, you got to solve it with what's at hand. If you want to eat something, you've got to make it with your replicator on the ship, like Star Trek. And not to mention, once we're on Mars, how do we grow food? In the book, we talk about Interstellar Lab, which is a company I invested in. I'm super excited about them. They're growing like mad. It's a French company founded by a plant scientist and venture capitalist, Barbara Belvisi. They're doing this program for NASA and the ESA to figure out how to grow food in contained environments on Mars. Meanwhile, they've translated to technology to Earth, and L'Oreal is putting these pods into their production facility to grow low volume, very high value added plants from which are derived key ingredients for cosmetics and fragrances and things like this. So the space technology must be proximate is now flowing back to affect our daily lives here on Earth. And that's really exciting.
Rob, you have got a lot of food for thought here. I would have to say much more, what's the word I want to say? Surprising in a way for me, just to kind of force me to think outside the box. The book, Proximity, How Coming Breakthroughs in Just-in-Time Transform Business, Society, and Daily Life. Rob, where's the best place that people can come find you? They can come find you at the University of Chicago. You got a website you want to send people to?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, Michael, I'm always on LinkedIn, very active there. Send me a note. If you send me a note on LinkedIn, mention that we met through Michael's podcast, so I have some context. Also, you can find me at twinglobal.org, World Innovation Network, twinglobal.org. Reach out to me. Happy to talk, especially if it's related to proximity. That's my mission objective for this next year or so, to go out and share this concept.
You have definitely laid out a lot of interesting science fiction possibilities. And some of them I am sure people are imagining will be great. And some people are imagining that maybe they'll think they won't be so great. But either way, I agree with you. The steady march forward is on. You can't stop it, I don't think. Rob, great stuff. I appreciate it.
Congratulations on a great show, by the way. And thanks so much, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.